I'm George. This is GLLR Cars. Welcome to the channel. Today I want to talk about the sound from cars. Sound from cars. Why is this important? And one of the things that I emphasize in the channel is the driving experience. Whenever you're going from point A to point B, if you just treat it as such, then driving experience means nothing to you. If on the other hand, driving a car and everything that comes with it, the enjoyment of it, is an experience, then sound has to be a part of it. And you've heard in many other channels or many other videos where people talk about the pleasant sound of engines or mufflers, etc. And that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit here. When it comes to sound, first we need to talk about what sounds from a car. So there are good sounds and there are bad sounds. So what are the bad sounds, the ones that you don't want to hear? Well, you don't want to hear squeaky sounds in a car. You don't want to hear rattling sounds from your chassis. You want to make sure that they are the sounds that the car is intended to make. You don't want to even hear wind noise. Those are bad sounds. So the intended sound that you hear, the one that will give you a good driving experience, is the sound that the engine makes and that you usually hear through the muffler, the tailpipe. In some cars that are mid-engine, you can hear the sound of the engine itself since it sits right behind your head, so you don't have to rely on the sound of the tailpipe to hear it. In many cars, such as this BMW 4 Series, which has a front engine, as most cars are front engine, the sound is not readily available inside the cabin, so you rely on the sound that comes from the tailpipes. So again, we're talking about the sound from the engine and the sound that comes out of the muffler or the tailpipes. And that varies. It varies on many different factors. It varies on how is your exhaust system set up. Many exhaust systems are configured with valves to actually inhibit sound. And this can be found in many European cars because there's actually sound regulations that prohibit a car from being too loud. And by the way, good sound and how loud something is not necessarily the same thing. For many people, there's a correlation. There's a one-to-one. The louder, the better. For yours truly, not so much. I think I like a sound that has a good level, but doesn't have to be a piercing sound that you have to cover your ears for it to be pleasurable sound. So, good sound. Not necessarily very loud, but a very good level of sound. I know that that's a little bit subjective, but in the end, each one of you know what is a good sound for each of you. Another thing to think about when it comes to sound is the pitch of the sound. The pitch of the sound is whether it's too low or too high pitch. I think a good analogy is if you listen to the voice of someone who is a bass, it has a very low voice, versus someone who has a very high-pitched voice. Hopefully I made a good impersonation there. But in the end, it's all about the pitch of the sound. Most people, and I think I may be generalizing here, they like a low-pitched sound coming from their cars. If a sound from a car is too high-pitched, usually it becomes an unpleasant sound. It becomes a little bit piercing, and it begins to, I don't know, you turn on the blender, that high-pitched sound of a blender, you don't want your engine to sound like that. So the low rumble sound of an engine is the type of sound that is pleasurable. So keep that in mind. What creates the sound? Well, obviously the engine creates the sound. and as it goes through the exhaust system, you could hear some of that out of the tailpipes. In those cars that don't prohibit sound, like in the US, for the most part, the cars are allowed to have a very unrestricted sound, if I may say so, and because of that, there are more cars that make a more low-pitched sound as a result, and they don't hold back as much. And then there's those cars that they try to enhance the sound. So if they don't have a sound that you can hear and they don't want to make it too loud, but yet they want the people to hear it in the cabin, they pipe some of the sound coming from the tailpipes into the speaker system of the cars to give it a pleasurable sounding cabin, yet not too distracting. And some cars do that. Some of the newer BMWs are beginning to do that. And it just depends. It's a matter of taste. Most people don't like that. I can tell you that I really prefer the natural sound of a muffler, of an engine. But nevertheless, I'll take whatever good sound I can get. And then finally, what creates the low-pitch sound is the sound of a larger engine. Usually, the larger the engine, the lower pitch the sound is. And even if the cylinders are bigger within that larger engine, the growl of the larger cylinders make for an even lower pitch sound. So the low pitch sound of V8s and even larger are the ones that I prefer. Usually you can tell a car's size of the engine. I wouldn't say to like how many liters, but you can tell that a car has a large engine if you just hear the car driving by, or even when someone starts the ignition. You can tell if a car has a V8 or larger. You may not be able to exactly count the cylinders, but you can at least tell, okay, that's a large engine. I remember when the Dodge Challenger came out and they made that 6.2 liter engine. When I heard the sound of that, it was quite interesting how low that rumble was and how pleasurable it sounded having such a low rumble because it was such a large engine. So that goes to show you that if you start looking for cars that make good sound, for the most part, they're going to be cars that are larger in engine displacement. The number of cylinders will be up to, it can get, you know, if you look at something like a Bugatti, it has 16 cylinders. But again, I'm not going to talk about cars that either I haven't driven or I haven't heard or I haven't experienced. I can only talk about the cars that I've had experience with. And because of that, they're usually V8s, V10s, V12s, and an occasional V6. This very car, it's a BMW 440i, has an inline 6, a turbocharged inline 6. And BMW is not the car maker who tries to take a lot of pride in sound. They don't try to make their cars purposely sound good. It's just not what BMW does. Some car makers do. I'll take for instance Ford. When the Ford Mustang came out, the 2015 Mustang is the current generation of Mustang that is out there. I'll never forget that commercial where the car is on a stage and a person grabs a microphone and puts the microphone on the tailpipe and they start the car. And that was the pitch. The sales pitch for the car was the sound. Seldom do you see that in a car commercial where they're saying, we're going to appeal to the buyer who likes sound, good sound that is. So inevitably the Ford Mustang is one of those cars that they tried to work very hard in giving it a very good low pitch sound. Speaking of which, the Mustang has a 4-cylinder counterpart and the GT, which is an 8-cylinder counterpart. And the two engines make a good sound. Obviously, the V8 is the one that gives the lower pitch sound. But even a 4-cylinder can have a good sound. It's just never going to be able to beat a V8. It just won't. Or even a V6. A V6 gets a little bit closer, like this car, but the sound will never be able to beat that sound of a V8. It just doesn't, it cannot create the pitch of a V8. Talking about pitch, the pitch, or how low or how high that that level is, also depends on how high you rev up the engine. So when an engine starts on idle, it's usually the lowest pitch sound that it makes. As you rev it up, you can tell, yeah, that's the reason why it kind of goes high pitch. So usually if a car revs it up too high, at least for me, it takes away from that low grumble. There are some exceptions to that. Some cars tend to, even though the pitch goes a little bit higher as you rev it up, it still makes a very pleasant sound. Lamborghinis do that. The Lamborghini Huracan, the Lamborghini Aventador, they make a very good sound even when they get revved up. Obviously, it's even better when it's revved up. So that goes to speak about how good the sound in some of those cars are. And I thought that if we're talking about the sound of many cars, why not talk about the cars that, at least in my experience, where they're cars that I've driven, cars that I've experienced, that I've been in it either as a passenger or that I've been with someone who started it up and allowed me to listen to it very carefully. The sound of those engines. I did put together a list of at least a handful of favorites that I have, and they're really in no particular order. These cars are cars that if you are looking to listen to how a car sounds, there is no substitute to actually being there and listening to it. No matter how much you can hear in a video, the sounds that are captured by a microphone and they're piped through your mobile device or computer, there is no match to actually being there or being behind the wheel and pressing on the accelerator and really experiencing that. So my intent in putting this list together is really to just giving you a small short list for you to go out and find out what is it so different about the sound in those cars that you should really check out. And without further ado, this is the list. One of them is the Ferrari F12berlinetta. The Ferrari F12berlinetta, as the name implies, is a 12-cylinder Ferrari front engine that gives an amazing sound. And the sound of the Ferrari F12 is a low rumble, and it is a good rumble. When you rev it up, the Ferrari F12, because it has such a large engine and large displacement, it's able to keep the pitch relatively lower than most other cars. And for that reason, the Ferrari F12berlinetta is one of those that you should check out. Another one is the Aston Martin DBS Superleggera. Aston Martin is one of those companies that they make sports cars as it is. You look at an Aston Martin and they're all sports cars. But then they did something like the DBS Superleggera, where they said, we're going to take something to the next level. And the sound on that car, it is not just a pleasant sound. For those of you who like the level, it is also a very loud sound. The next one on my list is the Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500. Talked a little bit about Mustang earlier and how good the sound is and how Ford tries to make it a point to make their cars, or at least the Mustang, sound good. Well, the king of Mustangs is the Shelby GT 500, which just came out, or it came out last year, and the sound that supercharged V8 engine makes, it is unmistakable. The pureness, the essence of American muscle car. If you want to experience that low rumble, the Mustang is definitely a car you have to check out. Next one on the list, the Porsche 911 GT3 RS. This is probably a surprising car in this list because you don't see big displacement engines on the Porsches yet. one of the best performing portions of GT3 RS, does produce a very good sound from that rear mounted engine. And it's something that you definitely, it's like trying to explain the taste of food to someone while they're watching someone else chew food. You just can't, no matter how hard you try. So trust me when I tell you, if you are able to hear it, if you're able to be in it, or even better, drive it, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Next one on the list, and I alluded to this one a little bit, the Dodge Challenger, and specifically now, the Dodge Challenger Red Eye. That Dodge Challenger Red Eye has such a rumble that even when the car is idle, I remember a friend of mine that had one, and we had already driven in it. We had already, you know, had a little bit of fun with it, and he was just parking the car. I got out, and the engine is nearly idle while you're just parking it into a parking spot. And just that low rumble, that low RPMs was just a symphony to my ears. It was unbelievable. Next one on the list, the AMG GT, specifically the GTR. The AMG GT is when Mercedes-Benz said, let's go ahead and make one of the better stock production sports cars that we can sell. And they made the GT, and they basically went from GT, GTR. There's now a GTR Pro, but just the GTR, which is the one I've been able to experience, it is another V8. Is what they call bi-turbo, which is a twin turbo V8, and again, very low rumble, and an engine that you can tell that they took care to build it in a way that it would be crafted unlike something that would be made on a factory line. It was something that was done by hand. So that's the appeal of the AMG GTR. Next one on the list, and it may surprise you, I chose the C7 generation of the Chevy Corvette. Well, why not the C8 generation? Well, simply because I haven't experienced it. I read about the car, I have seen videos of the car, but I've never driven it. I've never been a passenger in one, and I've never been with someone that started one up and I was able to listen to the exhaust of the C8, the current generation 2020 Chevy Corvette, so I cannot include that in my list. However, the previous generation, the C7, which they stopped manufacturing last year, was, and specifically the Chevy Corvette Z06, the Z06 with the V8 engine, the quadruple exhaust tips, which is an unbelievable experience. Just starting the car, I remember that I rolled the windows down and I started the car, and the sound that it would make from you not even touching the accelerator was something to just really understand at that point why it is that so many people like these cars with this big engines. You really do understand it at that point. Next one on the list, the Audi, and the Audi R8. Audi R8 had a V8 version of the R8, but there is now a V10. So the Audi R8 V10. The Audi R8 V10 is a mid-engine Audi, and it was probably Audi's first entrance into a pseudo supercar. Some people consider it a supercar. To me, it is. Some people consider it a sports car, but it is a mid-engine exotic, basically. And that Audi R8, because of the 10 cylinders, it does make a wonderful sound of that V10 engine. And then last but not least on my list, again, this list could go on and on, but these are just a handful of them, again, in no particular order. Last one on my list would be the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ, Super Veloce Iota. And the SVJ is like the most super duper version of the Aventador. And you can tell from the sound of a Lamborghini that this is a company, this is a make that's been doing it for a long time, that this is what they do, this is all they do. You would find yourself hard-pressed to hear a weak sounding engine from a one model, I figured the Aventador and the Aventador SVJ would have been the one I would have chosen. I recommend that you experience this. It may cost you some money. Many cars people choose not because they are faster, although that's a big part of it, but it's because they sound better. And I'm going to give you an example. The Ford Mustang GT, it's already a very fast car. 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds. Unless you're going to track a car like that, you're really not going to truly experience the full power of a beast with that kind of power. Again, unless you have your own private road or you go to a track. However, the Shelby GT 350 that came, that was hugely popular and was selling well above stupid price, was a very desirable car, still is. And now the Shelby GT 500, which costs so much more, over $20,000 more. Yet, why is it desirable? You may not be able to experience the phenomenal amount of the 700 plus horsepower that it has, but on public roads, at least you get to hear part of what that beast of an engine sounds like. And you don't even have to rev it up to enjoy it. Just driving down the road and hearing that is something to behold. And that's the reason, or one of the main reasons, why people enjoy sound in their cars. My name is George. This is GLLR Cars. And as always, drive safe.